More than 6 decades after her death, why are investigators still questioning what really happened to Marilyn Monroe? She was found alone, in her bedroom, in the early hours of a Sunday morning. No note that made sense, no clear timeline that held together, and a list of people who were, or weren't, where they said they were. The official case was closed within days, but the questions never stopped. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries, re-examining the evidence, the contradictions, and the secrets that powerful people may have spent decades trying to bury. This is the story of Marilyn Monroe's final night, and the investigation that refuses to die. She was the most photographed woman on Earth, the platinum blonde who made the whole world stop and stare. Norma Jean Mortensen, born into poverty, raised in foster homes, who transformed herself, through sheer force of will and extraordinary talent, into Marilyn Monroe. By 1962, she had starred in some of Hollywood's most beloved films: Some Like It Hot, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Bus Stop. She had been married to a legendary baseball player and one of America's most celebrated playwrights. She had sung Happy Birthday to the President of the United States in front of 15,000 people at Madison Square Garden. She was, in every sense of the word, a legend. And then, on the morning of August 5th, 1962, she was gone. She was 36 years in Graham. The official ruling was probable suicide, an acute barbiturate poisoning from an overdose of sleeping pills. But from almost the very first moment that ruling was handed down, people weren't so sure. Over the decades, investigators, journalists, biographers, and forensic experts have returned to this case again and again, each time finding new threads to pull, new inconsistencies to examine, new questions that the original investigation never adequately answered. What really happened inside that Brentwood home on the night of August 4th, 1962? Before we dive deep into the evidence, if you're new to this channel, now is a great time to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with anyone who loves true crime. It helps us keep bringing stories like this one to light. Now, let's go back to that night. Marilyn Monroe's home, a modest Spanish-style hacienda at 123005 Fifth Helena Drive in the Brentwood neighborhood, sat quietly behind a wall of trees and hedges. She had purchased it just months earlier. It was the first home she had ever owned. That afternoon, Monroe spent time with her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, a man who had become one of the central figures in her daily life, speaking with her by phone and in person nearly every day. He arrived at the house around 5 o'clock in the evening and spent several hours with her. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, was also present that day, a woman whose account of the evening would shift and change in ways that would later raise serious red flags. At some point during the evening, Monroe made or received several phone calls. Among those confirmed to have spoken with her that night were her lawyer, Milton Rudin, and, according to multiple accounts, someone connected to the Kennedy family. Peter Lawford, actor, socialite, and brother-in-law to President John F. Kennedy, reportedly spoke with Monroe that evening. By some accounts, she sounded slurry and incoherent. Lawford later said the call disturbed him, but that he was eventually reassured she was fine. He did not go to check on her. At approximately 10 p.m., Dr. Greenson left the residence. He had given Monroe a prescription for the sedative Nembutal, a powerful barbiturate, in addition to the chloral hydrate she was already taking. She had, by multiple accounts, been struggling with her mental health for some time. She had attempted suicide before. Eunice Murray later stated that she went to bed around midnight and that everything seemed normal. But here is where the timeline begins to fracture. Murray claimed she woke at approximately 3 a.m. and noticed a light visible under Monroe's bedroom door. She knocked. No answer. She called Dr. Greenson. He arrived, broke a window to enter the locked bedroom, and found Marilyn Monroe lying face down across her bed, unresponsive. The Los Angeles Police Department was not notified until 4:25 in the morning. That's a gap of more than an hour, and by some accounts, potentially much longer, that has never been fully explained. The Los Angeles County coroner at the time, Dr. Theodore Curfey, assigned the case to his newly formed suicide investigation team, a group of behavioral scientists tasked with conducting what was called a psychological autopsy. The autopsy itself was performed by Deputy Medical Examiner Dr. Thomas Noguchi, then just 30 years old and relatively new to the role. The toxicology results showed a lethal concentration of pentobarbital and chloral hydrate in Monroe's bloodstream. The official ruling, issued on August 27, 1962, more than 3 weeks after her death, was probable suicide. The word probable is important. Even the coroner's office, in its official finding, acknowledged uncertainty. The conclusion rested on several pillars: Monroe's documented history of depression and prior suicide attempts, the presence of empty pill bottles near her body, statements from her psychiatrist and housekeeper, and the toxicology report confirming a massive drug concentration. On the surface, the case seemed straightforward, but beneath that surface, investigators and researchers would spend the next 60 years finding cracks. Let's start with the timeline, because it is perhaps the most troubling element of this entire case. Eunice Murray, Monroe's housekeeper, gave multiple inconsistent accounts over the years. In her initial statements to police, she said she discovered something was wrong at approximately 3 a.m. But in a 1985 BBC interview, more than 2 decades after the fact, Murray suddenly changed her story. She admitted that Robert F. Kennedy, the U.S. Attorney General, had been at Monroe's home that evening, and she suggested that Monroe's body may have been discovered far earlier than officially stated. Why would a key witness change her story after 20 years? Then there's the question of the phone records. Monroe's phone records from that night were seized by the FBI, and for years, their contents were classified. What calls were made? To whom? And why would the federal government have any interest in the phone records of an actress who supposedly died by suicide? There are also serious questions surrounding the physical evidence. Dr. Noguchi's autopsy noted something unusual. There were no traces of pills in Monroe's stomach or digestive tract. When a person ingests a fatal dose of barbiturates, swallowing pill after pill, the physical evidence of that process should be detectable. The stomach should show remnants. The pill casings should leave marks. In Monroe's case, they didn't. This led some forensic experts to suggest that the drugs may have entered her system by another route, possibly an injection or a suppository. If that's true, it changes everything about how we understand this death. The ambulance driver, James Hall, later claimed that Monroe was still alive when paramedics arrived, and that something happened in the house that night that he was never permitted to speak about fully. There were also reports of a second ambulance being dispatched, of vehicles coming and going from the property during the night, and of documents and materials being removed from Monroe's home in the hours before police arrived. None of this was ever formally investigated, meant. In recent years, interest in the Monroe case has surged, and not just among conspiracy theorists. Serious documentary filmmakers, investigative journalists, and forensic professionals have returned to the case with new tools and new eyes. The release of previously classified FBI and CIA documents through Freedom of Information Act requests has brought new details to light, including confirmation that Monroe was under government surveillance in the months before her death due to her associations with the Kennedy brothers and her alleged access to sensitive political conversations. A 2022 Netflix documentary re-examined the case with fresh interviews and archival evidence, reigniting public debate and reaching audiences who had never heard the full story. Meanwhile, forensic analysts have revisited Noguchi's original autopsy findings using modern methodology, and some have concluded that the physical evidence is genuinely inconsistent with a simple oral overdose. Former Los Angeles police officers have also spoken out in recent years, including claims that the original investigation was deliberately curtailed, that certain interviews were never conducted, that evidence was removed from the chain of custody, that the case was, in the words of one source, managed rather than investigated. Whether those claims are credible or the product of decades of speculation is a question we'll examine carefully. But here's what we know for certain. The official investigation lasted less than 2 weeks. No thorough reconstruction of the timeline was conducted. Key witnesses were interviewed only once, and the case was closed before many of the most basic questions had been answered. With the facts on the table, let's examine the 3 most credible theories surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death. We present each one fairly, with its supporting evidence and its weaknesses. The most straightforward explanation, and one that many serious investigators still find credible, is that Monroe accidentally took too many pills. By the summer of 1962, she was in a fragile state. She had been fired from her last film, Something's Got to Give, just weeks earlier, a humiliation that devastated her professionally. Her relationships with the Kennedy brothers were reportedly souring. She was isolated, dependent on prescription medication, and struggling with severe insomnia. She took Nembutal for sleep. She took chloral hydrate for anxiety. People who are suffering often lose track of how much they've taken. In a fog of sedation, they take more and more. It is entirely possible, even probable, some argue, that Marilyn Monroe reached for her pills that night, not intending to die, but simply desperate for sleep, and took too many. The absence of pill residue in her digestive system, if she swallowed that many pills, the physical evidence should be there, and it wasn't. Monroe had attempted to take her own life at least twice before. She had spoken openly to her psychiatrist about suicidal ideation. She was, by many accounts, in one of the lowest periods of her life. The behavioral science team that conducted the psychological autopsy concluded that the emotional pattern of Monroe's final weeks was consistent with suicidal intent. The empty bottles, the locked door, the silence, and some of those closest to her, including her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson, believed, at least publicly, that she had chosen to end her own life. Monroe had reportedly been making plans for her future in the days before her death. She had scheduled meetings. She was engaged and talking about upcoming projects. And perhaps most tellingly, the housekeeper's story changed. If it was a simple suicide, why did so many people around her seem to be concealing something? This is the theory that has gripped the public imagination for 6 decades, and the one that, perhaps, asks the hardest questions. At the center of this theory are the Kennedy brothers. Multiple sources, including former Kennedy aide Peter Lawford, suggest that both President John F. Kennedy and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy had intimate relationships with Monroe. She allegedly told friends that RFK had promised to leave his wife for her. When that didn't happen, she reportedly became unstable, threatening to go public with what she knew. What did she know? Monroe had, according to some biographers, been present at private gatherings where sensitive political and intelligence matters were discussed. She kept a diary, a red book, that reportedly contained entries about Cuba, the CIA, and conversations she had overheard or participated in. That diary was never recovered. The theory holds that powerful people, concerned about what Monroe might say or do, arranged for her death, or at minimum, were present when she died under suspicious circumstances, and subsequently orchestrated a cover-up involving corrupt law enforcement contacts. It requires the sustained cooperation of a large number of people over a very long period of time, and while individual elements are suspicious, no smoking gun has ever emerged. No credible direct witness has ever come forward to say, "I was there, I saw what happened, this is what was done to her." But the absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. We're deep into this investigation now, and if you're finding this as compelling as we do, please take a second to like this video and share it. It genuinely helps us bring more stories like this to more people. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a great time. Now, let's hear what the experts have to say. What do the people who have studied this case most closely actually believe? The answer is, they're divided. And that division itself is telling. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who performed the original autopsy and went on to become one of the most respected forensic pathologists in American history, has maintained over the years that the physical evidence was consistent with suicide by overdose. But he has also publicly acknowledged that the investigation was inadequate and that the case was closed too quickly. Journalist Anthony Summers, who spent years researching Monroe for his landmark biography Goddess, concluded that the most likely explanation involved a cover-up, not necessarily a premeditated murder, but a chaotic, panicked response by people connected to the Kennedys who were present when Monroe died or became unresponsive, and who feared the political fallout of their association with her. Biographer Donald Spoto, who had access to Monroe's private papers and psychiatric records, argued forcefully for accidental overdose, pointing to evidence that Monroe's psychiatrist may have inadvertently administered a sedative suppository without fully accounting for what she had already taken that evening. Forensic experts who have reviewed the case in recent years remain genuinely uncertain. The toxicology is compelling for overdose. The absence of gastric residue is genuinely puzzling, and the behavior of multiple witnesses in the hours surrounding her death is, at minimum, deeply inconsistent with a simple, private tragedy. What everyone agrees on is this: the original investigation failed Marilyn Monroe. Whatever happened that night, the world never got a full accounting of it. In the decades since her death, Marilyn Monroe has become something far larger than a Hollywood star. She has become a symbol of beauty, of vulnerability, of the cruelty that fame can inflict on the people it chooses. And perhaps because of that, because she represents something universal about the cost of living in the spotlight, her death has never felt like simply a private matter. It has always felt like something that was done to her, by an industry, by powerful men, by a world that consumed everything she had, and then looked away when she needed help most. The mystery surrounding how she died has fueled books, documentaries, films, theatrical productions, and decades of investigative journalism. It has shaped how we talk about celebrity mental health, about the relationship between fame and exploitation, about the accountability of the powerful. Every few years, a new document is declassified, a new witness speaks, a new analysis is published, and every time, the case resurfaces, pulling a new generation of viewers and readers back into that quiet Brentwood home on a summer night in 1962. The fascination endures because the questions endure, and because Marilyn Monroe, the real woman, not the icon, deserved better than the investigation she got. So where does this leave us? The toxicology points to a fatal concentration of barbiturates. Her documented struggles with mental health and prior attempts lend weight to both the suicide and accidental theories. The physical anomalies, the missing gastric residue, the questions about the method of ingestion remain genuinely unexplained. The timeline has never been satisfactorily reconstructed. Key witnesses changed their stories. Evidence may have been removed. The phone records were classified. The FBI had a file on her, and at least one housekeeper admitted, 20 years too late, that powerful people had been in that house on the night she died. None of that proves murder. None of it proves a cover-up. But all of it, taken together, proves something: that we do not have the full story. A woman who changed the face of American culture was found dead in her bedroom at 36 years old. The investigation lasted days. The case was closed. And for more than 60 years, the people who loved her, the researchers who studied her, and the public that never forgot her have been left asking the same question: after more than 60 years? Do the answers still lie hidden somewhere in the shadows of Hollywood? What do you think happened to Marilyn Monroe? We want to hear your theory. Drop it in the comments below. Accidental overdose, suicide, or something far darker. This is one of those cases where every perspective matters, because the official version clearly doesn't tell the whole story. If this investigation moved you, please give this video a like. It takes 1 second, and it means everything to this channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear this story. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because we're just getting started. Every week, we go deeper into the cases the world forgot, or was never allowed to fully see. The truth is out there, and we're not done looking.